Hello. In the Crown of Aragon 639 years ago, it was May 20th, 1387. My name is Jonathan Seyfried. I'm a PhD candidate in history at the University of New Mexico, and this is the Historian's Notebook, a podcast about how history gets made. Season 1 is titled Multcara Companiona. We're looking at a document from each day of the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. Let's begin today's document. Today we return to Violant, and in the Varia register, number 1819, on folio 100R, we have a really interesting page because I want to say that this is two documents, because if you look at it, there's clearly two different text blocks, but they are nearly the same in terms of just almost word for word. And I really had to spend a lot of time trying to sort out why has this been written twice. So do we have one document that has two versions, or do we have two documents? I think there's no good single answer to that question. I think we have an interesting situation here. So let's first talk about, the apparatus. So the beginning of each letter starts with La Reina at the top, okay? And that's pretty standard. And then underneath the text block, the main text block, we have the word dirigitur, so to be directed to, and then we have on the right side the probata, and then below that we have a specific line. I think it reads something like etc. or no, it's not quite that. It's et, and then there's an x, and then simili materia fuerunt facere. So basically saying the same material was made, and then there's a difference. In the first document we have viginti, 20, and then in the second document we have the Roman numeral for 19, and then we have que funter tradire in both of them. In the first one we then go right to regenti, and then we have tesorias, like the treasurer, the king's treasurer, or the royal treasurer. But then in the second document, we have an extra word, supradicto. All right, as said above. And then we have the king's, or the royal treasurer. So, all right, the probata, it is almost the same, but I think there might be an important difference. The first line of the probata is identical. It's Per de Basanta, who is the name of one of the treasury officials, and then Mandavit, and then Domine. And then we have the difference. The difference is a change in the abbreviation. And that could be pretty significant. So we've got what looks like a regem in the first one, in the second line of the probata of the first top half letter. And then in the second one, we have what looks like an O. And so something like a rego or a regino. Let's see. Yeah, nothing seems to be correct with what I just said. So there's something, I think it ends with an O because there's a little O on top. And then what we have is a something like a I don't know what this abbreviation is. Something like Fachem or Fuere, I don't know. And then we have pair. And then we've got a difference between the two letters. One clearly is regentem. That's the first one. And then the second one might be a different abbreviation of something like royal. And then there might even be a slight difference in the way that the word for treasurer is written, although I think it could just be the scribe writing the same marks in just a slightly different way. For the second one, I can't quite be sure. So the probata is slightly different, and I think that is not just scribal preference. I think that the scribe Père de Besant has decided that there is a difference in the source of this directive from the treasury of the queen, or maybe there's a slight difference in the particular department within the treasury. Maybe one of them is from the queen's treasury and then the other one is from the king's treasury. That is a possibility in my mind, but I'm not even sure if I'm looking at a significant difference in the abbreviations, if we can go that far. The other thing that is different in these two letters is that the way they begin is different. So the first letter starts Prohomens, and then the second letter starts Becrehem Sapiats. But you'll notice that in the first letter, the beginning sentence is the same after Prohomens. So here's what I think. I think that for 20 copies of this document, their destination was a town council, the Prohomens, and then maybe for 19 copies of the document, there was no town council. It was maybe an individual who would be, well, I don't know, because it is still plural sapiats. Maybe it's not the governance structure of those particular places is not using the kind of Prohomens designation, that they are not identifying themselves as Prohomens. They are they don't know, or it's general. I can't quite figure out why this is important, but it seems to me to be the key to understanding why the scribe had a need to create two documents instead of just one with 39 copies, right? So basically, the content of the letter is, we're sending this guy. His name is Berengar Emmerich. He's an alguatzir, which is like bailiff or general official of the king. and he's going to explain to you why you're going to be giving us money. So the letter situates all of this in, well, it starts out with the frame of, or we trust that you know of the great missions and efforts that we have been doing in the times past, and what we need in order to sustain the well-being of our reign. So basically, starting out by saying we're doing amazing things. We've done amazing things in the past, and you have to pay for it because we can't do it unless we have the contributions from, and then the phrase in line 3, nostros vassals, our vassals. So basically, this is raising money, and it's not clear whether the demand is going to be a big one or just a routine asking of raising of funds, taxing, a special tax. Doesn't say what kind of tax this is. It doesn't give any information about any particular rationale. And then in this register, the other documents are dated in weird ways. So it's not that it's a weird way, it's that they're weird. It's weird in the time span of these pages, these folios in Register 1819, because before this folio we've got documents dated from June, and then after we've got just kind of a back and forth, and it's not daily anymore in this Varia register. It used to be that in this register there was like a document for pretty consistently, like almost every day or most days of the week. And then this register kind of drops off, and we're only getting a document in here every couple of days. I think we can really detect a shift in just how everything is done as the tumult of Joanne's near-death experience is kind of rippling through all of the different behaviors and procedures, and changing up the routines that might have been in place at the beginning of the reign, the first couple months. And so I think they're kind of kicking it into gear. You might have noticed that in some of the other registers from Violant, we're looking at folio numbers that are very low, right? Like folio 5 or 9 or something like that. So they're starting to move away from the Varia register, which actually started significantly before the reign. So they're making the choice of what to include in here using a different kind of criteria, and maybe we'll get a little bit more clarity on what that criteria is as we move forward, because there are more documents that we'll be looking at from this Varia register. There's no seal level mentioned in these particular documents, so this is, I guess, just a standard level of seal, and it's being kind of mass produced. Like, there's going to be 20 copies of the first one going to the Prohomens, and then there's going to be 19 copies going to the recipients who do not identify as Prohomens. So basically, what we can say in terms of the register, the seal level, is that this is kind of generic feeling, but there's something in these two documents, these two versions of a single document really, that stuck out to me, which is that in line 4 of both documents, we have this phrase, sabem esser zeladors de nostra honor. So that word, it looks way different. You don't really see a lot of words that begin with the letter Z. The letter Z as the start of a word does not come up very much in the documents I've been looking at. And so right away, my eye was drawn to that. And I was like, well, what is that? And I thought that it was ZELI based on the first version of the document. But then the second version, you can kind of see that it's got the shape of an A. So especially if you look at the second document, if you look at line 3, right above zelador, you have sends ayuda, H-A-I-U-D-A. And interestingly, ayuda is spelled with an H in the second version and no H in the first version. And this is a noun, help, the help of our vassals, so, or the aid of our vassals. So if you look at in the second version of the document, maybe we should just call it the second document because it's getting a little annoying to keep calling it version. So the second document on this folio, that letter A, it looks basically like a caret. And that then, if you look at zelador on the next line right below, it makes sense that it is ZELADOR. So, I did not get to that on my own. I was looking in the Diccionario Català Valencia Balear for Zelidor, Zelidor, and nothing was coming up. And then I opened up the OpenClaw pipeline document for this particular folio, and it did very well. I have to say, this register was the first one I put through the OpenClaw pipeline, and so it was just Claude because it glitched on Gemini for reasons I've already explained. And so I was only looking at what Claude did alone, and it came up with a transcription and translation that was very, very good. It was terrible when it came to the probata, but in terms of the content and topic and transcription of the main text block, it did very well. So it is just such the jagged frontier. Just again and again and again, the jagged frontier. You see it doing really well sometimes and then completely failing in other occasions, even within the same register. So here we have the OpenClaw pipeline generating a transcription of this document, and it transcribed it correctly, ZELADORS. And so when I had that information, that it was a letter A in the middle of that word, I went to the Diccionario again, and it did come up, and it means someone who is zealous, like a zealot. And in our time in English, that is almost a synonym to fanatic, where someone is just really over the top with their belief in something. But in this time, I think it might not have had quite such the fanaticism valence, and it would have just been enthusiastic, something like, or a defender, an enthusiastic defender. And what's interesting is that this word, it does not come up a lot in the registers that I had automatically transcribed through the OpenClaw pipeline. It does come up 3 times, including on this folio, but that's just 3 times. And certainly there might have been occasions where the automatic text recognition just mistranscribed words. So just because it came up 3 times in my search of the 6 registers doesn't mean that it only has occurred 3 times. It could have just been mistranscribed. So, not quite sure what that's worth to say that it came up only 3 times. But then I went to a much more authoritative place to find out information about word usage in medieval Catalan. And that is the database online. I'll put a link to it in the notes for today's episode. It's called the Corpus Informatiat del Català Antic. So CICA. This database is the result of a big project transcribing a lot of medieval Catalan texts. And for very common words, you can put them in and you'll get, thousands of results. So it's a good indication of how frequently a word was used. And when I put in zelador, it returned only 8 and none from the 14th century. Now, I will say that the Diccionario had a original citation from Francesc Ximenes, who was a contemporary of Joan and Violant. So the word in its first usage in the Diccionario is from the 14th century, but of the many pages, I think into the kind of tens of thousands of pages that make up the database for the CICA, they only had this word coming up 8 times, and in the 15th and 16th centuries, I think, not the 14th century. So here Violant is choosing a word that is not a standard, commonly used word for this context. So does that tell us anything is the big question. Is this particular word being used because the 39 recipients of this letter have actually been identified as places that are more loyal and more likely to cough up money at this time? That is something that I think is a real possibility for interpreting these 2 documents that are basically 2 versions of a single missive that is being sent along with the person from the treasury, the bailiff, Berengar Emmerich. And what does this say about the finances of Joan and Violant at this time? I don't know enough to know if this was a typical kind of solicitation for additional funding, or demand solicitation, maybe not the right word. You get, if you're ordered from the king and queen to pay up some money, it's not a solicitation, it's a tax, it's a legal requirement that you find that money. So, there's no amount specified. Maybe the amount was different for each place that Berengar Emmerich was going to. Berengar Emmerich has quite a journey ahead of him. He's got 39 places that he's going to be visiting. And this is interesting because I can't quite figure out why what seems to be just like somebody's job to go be a tax collector is getting this kind of special treatment in the Register of Violant. Or maybe every single person who's outgoing and is going to journey around. There is the other document that we looked at in which the knight Berengar Dolmes is being asked to go along with one of the treasury officials, Hakme Quinta. So we had that example. I'm not quite sure if that was in the Varia register. So I'm just trying to figure out, is this something special or different? Is the need for money more extreme? What's happening here in terms of whether this is something unusual that we're seeing? We'll just have to keep reading and see how it compares to other documents about collecting money from various places in the realm. I know that the scholar Yedo Ruiz Domingo would be able to look at this and tell me in an instant the answer to my question of whether this is a typical document or whether there's something unusual going on with the finances, because she has studied the finances of and the tax collection procedures of the household of Violant, both from before she was queen and then into her reign. So Yedo Ruiz Domingo, is a total expert on this kind of thing, and I just don't know her, so I'm not able to ask her. But if I had one chance to get the help of Yedo Ruiz Domingo, I would definitely ask her about this particular letter. Thanks for listening to this episode of The Historian's Notebook, Season 1, Molt Cara Companiona. If you are leaving with more questions than you arrived with, I've done my job. Remember, the motto of The Historian's Notebook is dissatisfaction guaranteed. Visit the website to see an image of today's document and additional show notes. And listen again tomorrow to hear about the next day in the first year of the reign of King Joan I of Aragon and Queen Violant de Bar. In the meantime, take care.